There is a point where you start to notice how quickly people decide what you are. It does not happen during conflict. It does not happen when things are loud or emotional. It happens afterward. In the quiet space where reactions are compared, someone recounts a moment involving you, and their description almost fits. Almost. They say you seemed distant, or reserved, or surprisingly unaffected. They say it casually, without accusation, as if the conclusion is obvious. You do not interrupt them. You feel the familiar pause instead, because from the inside, the experience was entirely different. You were present. You were attentive. You were tracking more than you showed. But the way you processed it did not translate outward in the way they expected. And that mismatch is something you have lived with longer than you can remember. You notice it most clearly in moments where emotion enters the room quietly, not through drama, but through subtle shifts. A change in someone's tone, a hesitation where there was none before, a sentence that carries more weight than it admits. Others respond with immediacy. You respond with calibration. You listen longer. You measure what is being said against what is not. You feel the emotional temperature before deciding how close to stand. This is often misread. People are used to empathy announcing itself. They expect it to be visible, expressive, unmistakable. They expect warmth to spill outward. What they encounter in you is something more contained. You feel deeply, but you do not broadcast it. You register intensity, but you do not amplify it. You care, but you do not rush to prove that you care. From the outside, this restraint can look like distance. From the inside, it feels like responsibility. You have learned that not every emotion benefits from immediate expression, that some feelings require space before they reveal what they actually are, that reacting too quickly can distort what is being sensed. So you wait, not because you are unsure, but because you are aware. This awareness shapes the way you move through conversations. When someone shares something personal, you do not mirror their emotional volume automatically. You respond to what feels real, not to what feels performative. You notice when someone wants reassurance more than understanding. You notice when emotion is being used as a bridge or as a shield. You notice when closeness is genuine and when it is being rushed. You do not call these things out. You hold them. And holding without reacting is work. You learned this early. Even as a child, you sensed shifts before adults named them. You felt tension before voices changed. You noticed when kindness was forced, when silence carried meaning, when safety in a room was conditional. You did not have language for this. You only had sensation. So you adapted. You learned that responding too honestly made others uncomfortable, that naming what you felt disrupted the atmosphere, that your sensitivity did not always invite understanding. So you refined it. You became observant rather than expressive. You learned to track without declaring. You learned to stay composed even when you felt everything. This composure became mistaken for detachment. But detachment implies absence. What you experience is not absence. It is saturation. You absorb before you respond. You process before you engage. You filter before you commit. As you grew older, this pattern became more pronounced. You realized that being emotionally open did not always mean being emotionally safe. That closeness without discernment led to depletion. That some connections demanded more than they returned. So you began to pull back selectively, not abruptly, not dramatically, quietly. You stopped explaining yourself to people who did not listen beyond their assumptions. You stopped offering emotional access by default. You began choosing where your presence was sustainable. This is often the point where judgment enters. People notice the withdrawal, but not the reasoning behind it. They feel the distance, but not the discernment. They experience the boundary, but not the care that shaped it. They label what they can see: cold, aloof, uninterested. They rarely consider that you are still engaged, just differently. You do not retreat because you lack empathy. You retreat because you have too much of it to spend carelessly. You understand how easily emotions transfer, how quickly moods spread, how deeply unprocessed feelings can entangle. You have felt what happens when you stay too long in environments that ask you to carry what is not yours. So you learn to step back. This stepping back is not rejection, it is regulation. You do not disengage from people, you disengage from emotional overload. You notice when a dynamic begins to drain rather than nourish. When conversations revolve around unresolved cycles. When emotional expression lacks movement or insight. You sense when empathy is being asked for, but responsibility is not being taken. That is when you pull away. Not to punish, not to control, but to preserve clarity. You have learned that clarity is fragile. Once compromised, it is difficult to restore. This is why you do not rush emotional closeness, why you hesitate before deep engagement, why you prefer depth over frequency. Others may interpret this as withholding. You experience it as precision. You want connection that is conscious. You want exchanges that respect boundaries without needing them announced. You want emotional presence that does not require performance. This desire shapes how you show up. You listen more than you speak. You observe before you respond. You allow silence to do work that words cannot. Silence, for you, is not emptiness. It is information. You notice how people react to it. Some lean into it. Some rush to fill it. Some become uneasy. These reactions tell you more than explanations ever could. You see who needs validation immediately, who can sit with uncertainty, who mistakes quiet for judgment. You do not correct these interpretations. You simply take note. This is how you decide where to invest. Over time, this pattern becomes self-reinforcing. The more you refine your awareness, the more selective you become. The more selective you become, the more you are misunderstood. The more you are misunderstood, the less you feel compelled to explain. Not because you do not care how you are perceived, but because you understand how limited perception often is. You have noticed that people tend to interpret behavior through their own emotional habits. Those who express freely expect expression in return. Those who process externally assume internal processing is avoidance. Those who need emotional affirmation read restraint as absence. They measure empathy by visibility. Yours is not visible in the ways they expect. You feel before you respond. You sense before you speak. You process before you commit. This creates a lag. That lag is where misunderstanding grows. They think you are pulling away from them. In reality, you are pulling toward equilibrium. You are adjusting distance so you can remain present without becoming overwhelmed. You are recalibrating so that your empathy remains grounded rather than reactive. You have learned that empathy without boundaries dissolves into exhaustion, that feeling everything for everyone eventually leaves nothing stable inside. So you have developed an internal structure. You filter, you pace, you contain. Containment is often mistaken for suppression, but suppression denies emotion. Containment holds it until it can be understood. You do not deny what you feel. You study it. You ask where it originates, whether it belongs to you, whether it requires action or simply acknowledgement. This level of internal discernment is quiet. It does not announce itself, which is why people miss it. They see the absence of overt reaction and assume absence of care. They feel the boundary and assume rejection. They experience your withdrawal and assume indifference. What most people miss is that your withdrawal often happens after extended engagement, after listening, after absorbing, after holding space longer than you should have. You pull back not because you did not care, but because you cared past the point of sustainability. This is the hidden pattern. Your empathy does not move outward immediately. It moves inward first. You internalize, you integrate, you regulate. Only then do you respond. In environments that respect this rhythm, you thrive. In environments that demand constant emotional output, you shrink. Not emotionally, energetically. You become quieter, more reserved, less available. People interpret this as emotional withdrawal. You experience it as self-protection. There is a difference. You are not closing off. You are closing the loop. You are completing internal processes before opening external ones. This pattern becomes especially visible in relationships. Romantic, platonic, professional. People often want emotional access without emotional patience. They want immediacy, reassurance, responsiveness. You offer depth, not speed. You do not escalate intimacy quickly. You do not share everything at once. You do not merge emotional states. This can frustrate those who equate closeness with constant exchange. They may feel shut out. You feel intact. You have learned that intimacy without differentiation becomes fusion, and fusion erodes clarity. You want connection that allows both people to remain whole. This often means slowing down. Slowing down is misread as hesitation. Hesitation is misread as disinterest. But what you are doing is assessing safety, not physical safety, emotional safety. You are asking questions silently. Is this person aware of their own emotions? Do they take responsibility for their inner world? Can they tolerate difference without personalizing it? Can they sit with silence without demanding resolution? Your answers to these questions determine how close you move. This discernment is invisible to others. They only see the result. Distance. They do not see the care behind it. They do not see the effort it takes for you to remain present without overextending. They do not see how much you feel before you decide. This is why labels come easily. Cold, guarded, hard to read. But none of these describe what is happening internally. Inside, you are attuned. You are sensitive to nuance. You are processing multiple layers simultaneously. You are aware of emotional undercurrents others overlook. You feel shifts before they are named. You sense incongruence before it becomes conflict. You do not react to every signal. You prioritize which ones matter. This prioritization is not emotional avoidance, it is emotional intelligence. But emotional intelligence does not always look warm. Sometimes it looks like restraint. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like stepping back before things become distorted. You have learned that not every emotion needs to be shared, that not every feeling benefits from exposure, that some understanding is meant to remain internal. This does not make you less empathic. It makes your empathy integrated. Integrated empathy does not overwhelm the system. It does not collapse boundaries. It does not confuse feeling with responsibility. It allows you to feel deeply while remaining anchored. This anchoring is rare, and because it is rare, it is often misunderstood. People expect empathy to be expressive, validating, immediately responsive. They do not always recognize empathy that is observational, steady, and discerning. They do not realize that your pulling away is often an act of respect. Respect for your limits, respect for their autonomy, respect for the emotional space between you. You do not chase connection. You allow it to form where mutual awareness exists. You do not demand closeness. You allow it to emerge where safety is felt on both sides. This means some people will feel you retreat, not because you are unavailable, but because you are unavailable for unconscious dynamics. You are not here to absorb what others refuse to process. You are not here to stabilize what others avoid naming. You are not here to perform empathy at the expense of clarity. You are here to remain aware. This awareness shapes your presence. It is calm. It is grounded. It is not reactive. And because it does not seek validation, it can feel distant to those who rely on emotional feedback to feel secure. You are not cold. You are regulated. You are not detached. You are discerning. You are not withdrawn. You are conserving what allows you to stay whole. This pattern does not need correction. It does not need explanation. It does not need to be softened to fit expectations. It is a form of integrated awareness, one that allows you to feel without flooding, to care without collapsing, to connect without losing yourself. You do not need to announce it. Those who recognize it will feel it. Those who do not may continue to misunderstand. You have learned to let both be true. You have also noticed something else. The more regulated you become internally, the less you feel compelled to explain yourself externally. Not out of arrogance, out of economy. You have learned that explanations rarely correct misinterpretations. They simply create new ones. When you try to clarify your intentions, people often hear what fits their existing narrative. They filter your words through their own emotional habits. They translate your restraint into distance, even when you are speaking openly. So you stop over-explaining. You let your behavior stand on its own. This, too, is misread. People expect emotional accessibility to come with constant transparency. They want reassurance that they are understood, valued, mirrored. You offer understanding without display, value without insistence, presence without performance. This quiet presence unsettles some people. It creates a subtle imbalance. They feel more than they can locate. They sense that you are aware of things they are not tracking. They notice that you respond to the underlying dynamic rather than the surface emotion. This can feel exposing, not because you are invasive, but because you are accurate. You do not probe. You do not interrogate. You do not push. You simply notice. And noticing changes the field. People who rely on emotional expression to maintain coherence may feel destabilized around you. They want reaction to anchor the interaction. They want feedback to confirm the moment. You offer steadiness instead. Steadiness does not always comfort. Sometimes it reveals. You see how often people confuse emotional intensity with intimacy. How frequently they equate sharing with connection. How rarely they pause to ask whether what they are expressing has been integrated. You are sensitive to this distinction. You feel the difference between emotion that wants to be witnessed and emotion that wants to be discharged. You sense when vulnerability is genuine and when it is performative, even unconsciously. This does not make you judgmental. It makes you selective. You do not pull away from people because they feel deeply. You pull away when depth lacks grounding, when emotion becomes circular, when expression replaces reflection, when connection becomes extraction. You have learned that empathy without discernment turns into obligation, and obligation slowly erodes presence. So you step back, you give space, you regulate distance not to create separation, but to preserve clarity. This is where the misunderstanding becomes most pronounced. From the outside, your withdrawal appears sudden. From the inside, it has been forming quietly for some time. You have been noticing small signals, the way conversations loop without movement, the way emotional weight accumulates without resolution, the way your nervous system begins to tighten rather than open. You do not wait until depletion to respond. You respond early. This is something many people do not understand. They only recognize boundaries once they are spoken. You feel boundaries long before they need to be named. You feel them as tension, as fatigue, as a subtle loss of internal spaciousness. When that space begins to close, you step back, not to disconnect, to recalibrate. This recalibration is internal. You are not angry. You are not resentful. You are not wounded. You are adjusting input so you can remain coherent. People often assume that pulling away means something went wrong. Sometimes nothing went wrong. Sometimes you simply recognized a limit. This recognition does not come from fear. It comes from awareness. You are acutely aware of how porous you are, how easily emotional states cross into you, how deeply you register what others dismiss. You have felt what happens when you ignore this sensitivity, how quickly you lose yourself in environments that demand emotional labor without reciprocity. So you honor it, quietly, without drama. This honoring looks like distance to those who do not share your internal landscape. They want you closer. They want more access. They want confirmation that the connection is intact. You want coherence. You want exchanges that do not require self-abandonment. You want closeness that respects internal pacing. This difference in priorities creates friction. They interpret your restraint as lack of interest. You experience their urgency as intrusion. Neither of you is wrong, but the mismatch remains. You notice that the people who understand you rarely ask for more than you can give. They sense your rhythm. They respect pauses. They do not rush your responses. They do not fill silence with demands. They do not require constant emotional affirmation. Around them, you soften. You do not need to pull away. This contrast teaches you something important. It is not people you withdraw from. It is dynamics. You move toward environments that allow your empathy to remain integrated. You move away from those that fragment it. This movement is subtle, often invisible, which is why it is so easily misunderstood. People see the outcome, not the process. They see you step back. They do not see how long you stayed present before doing so. They do not see how carefully you considered the shift. They do not see the internal negotiation that preceded it. You have learned to trust this process, even when it costs you connection. You know what happens when you override it. You become foggy. You lose discernment. You start responding instead of sensing. You do not like who you become in that state. So you choose clarity over approval. This choice carries consequences. Some people will feel rejected. Some will project meaning onto your silence. Some will assign motives that have nothing to do with you. You let this happen, not because it is easy, but because it is honest. You are no longer willing to contort your internal reality to maintain external comfort. You have done that before. It came at a cost. You remember how it felt to stay in conversations that drained you, to absorb emotional chaos without acknowledgement, to be seen as supportive while slowly disappearing inside. You do not want that again, so you pull away earlier now. This earlier withdrawal is often interpreted as coldness, but coldness is numbness. What you experience is the opposite. You feel too much to remain entangled indiscriminately. You have learned that empathy does not require proximity at all times, that care does not demand constant engagement, that love does not collapse boundaries. You are redefining closeness, not as fusion, but as resonance. Resonance requires alignment. When alignment fades, you do not force it. You allow distance to restore perspective. This restoration is where your empathy recalibrates. You come back clearer, more grounded, less reactive. Those who understand this rhythm recognize that your withdrawal is temporary. They do not chase it, they allow it. Those who do not understand it feel threatened by it. They interpret space as loss, silence as judgment, boundaries as punishment. You cannot correct this interpretation without violating your own needs. So you stop trying, you let your behavior speak for itself. This is where the pattern becomes fully visible. You are not withdrawing from connection. You are withdrawing from dysregulation. You are not avoiding emotion. You are refusing to be consumed by it. You are not detached. You are anchored. This anchoring is quiet. It does not seek recognition. It does not need validation. It simply maintains balance. You have learned that balance is what allows you to remain empathic without self-erasure. This is the emotional pattern most people miss. They see the distance. They miss the integration. They see the silence. They miss the awareness. They see the boundary. They miss the care that shaped it. You do not correct them. You continue living from this internal alignment. Those who can meet you there will recognize it. Those who cannot will continue to misread you. You allow both, not as resignation, as discernment